Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie Fairbanks. I'm a features programmer at Doc NYC, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to a Q&A for Calendar Girl. We're excited to talk to the director, Christian Bruun, about his newest film. We also are very lucky and have with us today the writer and the producer, Natalie Nudell, and the producer and charming subject, Mary Hackley. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Welcome to Christian, Natalie, and Mary. Thank you for joining us and for sharing Calendar Girl with Doc NYC's audience.
Thank you. It's nice to be here on Zoom, and thanks for showing our film.
I am sure that everybody at home right now has fallen in love with Ruth, as I'm sure all three of you did as well, and so did I. My first question for you, Christian, is let's start with Ruth. I don't know how I didn't know about her. Granted, I'm not in the fashion industry, but still. I'm guessing that many of us didn't know about her and her infamous, the engine behind this incredible, iconic pink calendar. How did you find out about Ruth?
It was sort of a random thing. I came across Ruth through some friends who knew Natalie. And Natalie had been working on a lot of things with the calendar. And someone brought up the idea that there wasn't a film about this incredible woman. And so I met with her. I went to her house and had coffee with her one morning and just realized that what an incredible life she was living and had, and what a fantastic career. And I just thought I love these stories of people who do amazing work, who change an industry. He just does incredible work, and then but does everything sort of in the background, doesn't have necessarily be in the spotlight or be incredibly narcissistic about it. She just did it. She was a disruptor. She changed the fashion industry. She basically built New York fashion industry. So after that coffee, I was like, yes, we got to document this. We have to make this film.
So this question is for Christian and for anyone else who'd like to speak about it. The film includes interviews with so many iconic people in the fashion industry. You know, beyond Ruth and her sons, we have the infamous Bill Cunningham, who unfortunately passed away last year, Andrew Bolton, Carolyn Herrera, Nicole Miller, Betsy Johnson, Annette Lepore, Diane von Furstenberg, Jeffrey Banks, Tom Brown. There's so many people. I could go on and on and on. You have an incredible list of subjects in the film. How did you get so many people to agree to be part of the film? Was it Ruth's stellar reputation, or was it your charm?
It was pure Ruth. It was just, everybody loved Ruth. And I think it's even in the film, there's a little quote that the thing about Ruth, that everybody in the fashion industry loved her. So even though she had this very central role of sort of a curator and the gatekeeper in some ways of fashion events in New York, everybody just loved her. So whoever we called her, we're like, of course. I mean, Mary, you can maybe talk a little bit about that too, right? You worked with her for years and people just loved her.
They did. She was so easy to love. I mean, even after I met her, after I interviewed, I was like, wow, she's wonderful. She's just sweet, a great person to work for. She's amazing. She's so energetic for her age to do everything that she did, still insist on taking the subways. And like, she would go ahead of me and I would be like, Ruth, wait. And I don't know, there's so many memories. Sometimes when her hearing aid wouldn't work, and then she would go ahead of me. And one time my subway card ran out of money and I couldn't get across. And she was about to get on the train and arrived in the station. She's about to jump on. So I jumped over the rail and then the subway so that I wouldn't lose her, because anyway, I miss her. I just watched the final version yesterday and it was so nice. I mean, brought back so many memories, but it was also really sad. But I'm so happy that Christian and Natalie did this and they came around at a really good time. I think it was good to have this going on because the sale of the business was really hard for her. It was a big transition. She didn't want to stop working. It just kept her going. She loved it. She loved people and she was just so positive all the time. I'm so fortunate to have had that kind of mentor and work experience. Probably won't ever have it again, but it was wonderful.
And a follow-up question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Follow-up question to that, Mary. Given that there were so many incredible people in the film, as a result of Ruth's incredible reputation. She's been working in the industry since the 1930s. You've been working with her for a very long time. Was there anyone that was particularly difficult to watch, you know, the interview of, or was it particularly difficult to get an interview for someone in the film? I know that you were a subject and a producer and more in front of the camera, but was there anyone that, you know, Ruth had some hesitancy over being included?
Probably not. No, I don't think Ruth was really concerned about anyone.
I have a
don't
funny
think so,
anecdote
is it?
about Bill Cunningham, though.
Hmm?
When we tried to get Bill Cunningham in the film, he was really, really hard to reach. And Ruth ended up calling him, and we tried to meet him on the corner of 57th Street in the park one day and waited around. Do you remember that, Christian?
I remember.
Oh, yes.
And then ended up finally catching him. But truthfully, Mary was so pivotal and also helping us reach out to all the designers and make those connections.
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, I think it was just, I mean, we came in and started filming the last 6 weeks that office was open. So this was like near the end of 70 years of career. Mary wasn't around for 70 years, but it was an incredible time. We were there, like the last issue was being printed, and just seeing the whole operation, and also just seeing like how with it Ruth was, and just how naturally she was still doing her job, and sort of being that great gatekeeper. I don't like to say that word, but she was just, everybody was calling, like every day called the office, every designer, every design house, every organizer and PR person would call and just make sure everything was ready for Fashion Week, everything was coordinated. And she just handled all of that. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that you say, Natalie, that Mary was so pivotal. We see in the film, Mary, all of the boxes of the contacts, and you know, it just goes to show that you don't have to have a cell phone, that having people's contacts written down really works, because look at all of the incredible individuals in the film.
Yeah, for Ruth, it allowed her to always have access to it. You know, she could check her email and do certain things on the computer, and she was really good with her cell phone. But you know, that's just, it worked for her, and that was one of the things I always wanted to help her keep going, as you know, for as long as she wanted to do it.
There's a very funny. Sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a very funny scene that we had to cut from the film just for length, but we'll put it out there at some point. But where Ruth is her sons are trying to teach her how to use Siri, and it's just hilarious. But she was pretty tech savvy. She was 94 years old. She was great. Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, she never struck us as non-tech savvy. I just meant that, you know, it's incredible. She had her system, it worked for her, and as a result, not only was she kind of the marshal of the fashion industry for decades, but was also pivotal in helping secure, you know, Mary was helpful in securing a lot of these subjects as a result of all these contacts that were kept in unusual organizations, as we saw in the film, which was just so idiosyncratic and just so very Ruth. I'd love to talk about, you know, the writing of the film. So Natalie, you're the producer and the writer on the film, but let's talk a little bit about crafting what is not only a profile of Ruth, but also a history of American fashion and how things have changed since the 1930s. We were saying at the beginning, before we started recording, that this is a love letter to Ruth, but also to New York City and the people behind the curtain that rarely get a spotlight. So talk to us about how you work to help provide some structure to the film with your writing.
So we felt that telling this broader story about the history of American fashion in the 20th century would really, and using Ruth and her story as this anchor to have a commentary on this larger story about commerce, women, clothing, all of these things, was really, really valuable and really useful, especially since she, more than really anyone else, had the most longevity and longest and strongest legacy within the fashion industry. She, as you may note, watching the film, had a very interesting and important personal story, but her professional career and her professional story is very singular in her impact. And I think that the history of American fashion in the 20th century, in many ways, sort of is developed by people like Ruth, like Eleanor Lambert, like others who were behind the scenes, and these stories weren't generally told. The thing is, and I hope that this comes through in the film, New York fashion is a very small bubble. And when I say New York fashion, ultimately it's American fashion. And so by creating and connecting these stories through Ruth, and her calendar, which was really this like central force that everyone was revolving around, we were able to really tell a story about the impact of important female executives, the impact of how important it is to structure this fashion system that we've been talking about, as you may know, right now with COVID-19, like after World War II, excuse me, we're seeing a major transformative moment in global fashion. And so the calendar and the documentary really tells this story that in many ways perhaps is not in existence anymore. And so I think the film really captures the networks, the sort of thoughtfulness, and the community of American fashion that ultimately produced the clothing that we all wear on our bodies.
Yeah, thank you for the perspective, Natalie. I think it's, it's so amazing. Ruth started out as seeing a need and creating something to organize everyone, and then ended up being this central, critical character to everyone in the industry. And then it became a power tussle. And I think what's really amazing that you do an incredible job establishing in the film is how even-keeled Ruth was, that she didn't hold grudges, that she just cut through the noise. Mary, maybe you can talk about that a little bit, working with her for so long. I'm sure there were plenty of instances where she was frustrated, but how did she tend to cope with high pressure situations?
Well, there were a couple of designer conflicts and people who didn't want to move out of their spots. And Ruth would be like, well, I'm going to take you off the calendar. I mean, but she did it in a really calm way. And she was very firm, but it didn't faze her. She kept so busy socially and doing cultural things, and going to the theater, the symphony. Like it didn't really faze her much. I guess that comes from years of being in business, and why should she let it bother her? At the end of the day, it was what had to be done. She would just kind of brush her hair like that sometimes, but that would be it. I don't know. And then she never got too stressed.
Yeah. She was as Natalie said, she was a singular woman. It's interesting that you use that word, Natalie. I think a lot of us have used that around Ruth, and sounds like an incredible person to work with. This next question is for both Natalie and Christian. The film is beautiful as well. Not only is it a love letter to Ruth, but it's stunningly gorgeous to watch. And I'm sure that there was some pressure given the fact that you were portraying the fashion industry, an industry that takes appearance and how things are constructed and come together very seriously, to make sure that the film was also constructed beautifully, and that it had gorgeous graphics and a lovely score, and that it was edited sublimely. How did you two go about finding the right partners to help you kind of put the polishing touches on Calendar Girl?
Well, I think we work with people that we had worked with before, that we knew, except for the composer. It's a new person in our lives. But I think, it was actually, there was a lot of pressure, and I was also the cinematographer of the film, so there was definitely a lot of pressure. And oftentimes when we did the interviews or even went to Fashion Week, it was if we couldn't have like a big crew, so it was always really often just Natalie and myself, and carrying some lights and the cameras and getting it all set up. So there was a lot of pressure in terms of visual, like how the film's going to turn out, but also even just showing up at these places and you're sort of working, but you still have to look fashionable. Natalie always looked incredibly fashionable. I try to wear a nicer outfit and not the typical I'm carrying equipment around New York City. So that was sort of a fun aspect of it, but it was pretty glamorous, and just I think being around Ruth, that was so used to that world, and she just carried us with such ease, and like Mary saying, like, I don't know, there was just an ease about her, maybe because she'd done it for so many years, but she just didn't let things bother her, and she was in this incredibly, surrounded by the most beautiful models and successful designers, and she just did it with such ease and introduced it to everybody, and it was a really fantastic process to make this film. So hopefully that's a big reason that it turned out the way it did.
I think we were so lucky to have Ruth as a subject. She's so endearing and so lovable, and anyone who came in contact with us or her immediately wanted to be involved, and would really be so thrilled to, like you, discover who she was. And she was also so wonderful to be around that we were really lucky to be able to attract really talented people to help us. I also think the calendars themselves are really interesting because they really did keep the same format for 7 decades, with the covers changing. And I think we spoke about this very early on. We really wanted to do something really interestingly, graphically interesting with the calendars, because they're so fascinating examples of ephemera. And so I think that the editors and the designers that worked on the film did such a fantastic job in utilizing the calendars and all of that graphics and that graphic design, because ultimately it was really just the cover that changed year to year. And so I thought that was so successful, and thank you so much for your compliment on the film.
I mean,
yes, and sorry, I just wanted to say, yes, thank you to Rosie and to Autumn. Rosie was the editor. Autumn did a lot of the graphics, and yeah, it's just a great team. It was just a great experience.
That really comes through in the film, the fact that not only did Ruth create a family around her, including her biological family, but also Mary, but also the fact that the team clearly behind the film had a lot of warm and fuzzies for each other, because the film is just so light and beautiful. And there is that lovely moment, Natalie, you're referencing, the covers are changing, where Mary and Ruth are going through the calendars and she's talking about the ones that she doesn't even remember, and then the ones she loves the most because she's produced so many. And it's just a really, really wonderful moment. My last question for all of you is, and I would like to start with you, Mary. You mentioned earlier that you had just seen the film for the first time recently, and it was obviously very difficult to watch. But I'd like to ask all of you, what was it like to share the film with Ruth's family? Did Ruth ever get to see a final cut of the film, or like a rough edit? So Mary, let's start with you. Talk a little bit more about your response to the film, and if you are aware of what her son's response to the film is.
I'm not, and in fact, I thought about reaching out to them. I thought they did a great job. I enjoyed seeing their interviews, and the editing was really good. I thought it was beautiful, and afterwards I was like, well, I wonder, maybe it's because I'm so close to the subject matter, and but it's so good to hear your thoughts, because you didn't know who was present. I love hearing that you enjoyed it, and it's fantastic. I thought Christian and Natalie did a wonderful job. It was fantastic. I teared up so many times, and finally I was just like, I'm not going to hold them back. I just cried and got it out, and I was fine. But I'm just happy that it was done. I'm so happy, because also it is educational and informative, and will be around for people to learn in the future about Ruth and the fashion calendar and how everything works as far as Fashion Week, or worked. I'm sure we'll get back to that one day. Anyhow, yeah.
Thank you. And for Christian and for Natalie, can you tell us what it was like to share the film with some of the many subjects that we've discussed with Ruth's family, and just general experiences, given that we are in this brave new virtual space?
Well, one of the things about making independent documentary, she said it does take a long time. So we started filming in 2014. So unfortunately, Ruth never saw the final film, but she did see, actually, Natalie showed a rough cut to her. I wasn't in town. Yeah, I think it's one of the big regrets is that we just couldn't get it done in time. And Ruth was almost 99 years old when she passed away. But Natalie, you can talk to that. You actually showed it to her, right?
So yes, I was determined to show her something. And so we did show her a rough cut that is not too far away from the cut that ultimately became the final cut. She, of course, even though was not in her best state health-wise, was giving me edits and had many opinions about the film, which I loved. We have shared the film with her family. And one thing that really was so amazing to hear. So Ruth had a best friend, well, she's still alive. Ruth's best friend of 70 years is a wonderful, wonderful lady named Adele Holman. And I shared the film with Adele, and her response to me, basically saying she was so grateful because she felt like she had a few more hours with Ruth, is so accurate, because even when I watched the film, the entirety of it, just that's what it was like being around her. It really captures her essence, her personality, her character. And I think that her family and her friends hopefully will share that experience. And I know that everyone has very positive feelings about the film, and everyone is so, so excited to share it with the world as we are.
Yes.
It's a beautiful film. It's a beautiful story. Ruth was an incredible individual, very much picking up on what both Mary and Natalie have said. She was a powerhouse in an industry that I think, power is very important, and you don't see a ton of women in the leadership roles in most industries. And I think, as you mentioned, historically, there's been contraction after major events. We're in the middle of a major event, and we'll probably see some contraction again in our overall workforce. So how wonderful to celebrate someone who came into this place quietly and to absolutely change the fashion industry. Thank you all so much for making the film and for being here with us. Everyone at home, please put your hands together and thank the director of Calendar Girl, Christian Bruun, the writer and the producer, Natalie Nudell, and the producer and one of the main subjects, Mary Hackley. We appreciate you sharing this film with our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.